everyone. My name is Maya. Being in this room filled with so many women is incredible. It makes me extremely optimistic about the future of technology and female leadership in our industry. I'm a product manager at Uber, and my story starts a little over 6 years ago. I joined Uber as the third product manager at the company. At the time, I had no prior product management experience, and today I manage a team of product managers on Uber Eats. Maybe it's because I'm a younger sibling, but for me personally, I've always found it's really helpful to hear other people's stories as I've navigated my own career. So today, I'd like to share my story with you, as well as some of the lessons I learned along the way. My hope is that these stories resonate with you, and that the lessons I learned help you as you navigate your careers. So a little over 6 years ago, in the summer of 2012, I was wrapping up a 2-year analyst program and trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I had spent the last 2 years as a management consultant, traveling around the world, racking up all those hotel points, and working with teams of MBAs to break down problems and come up with strategies for Fortune 500 companies. As interesting as the problems were, I had this itch and this desire to actually go build the solutions, not just tell someone else what to do, but to do it myself. I had a passion for technology, and I loved software, and so product management seemed like the perfect position for me, where I'd be able to use my problem-solving and analytical skills from consulting and be able to actually build solutions. But when I started my search, everyone asked me pretty much the same question: are you technical enough? Even though my degree was math and computational science, and computer science was about half of my degree, because my resume didn't literally say the words computer science, no one thought that I was qualified for the job. And spending 2 years as a management consultant certainly did not help that perception. The VCs I talked to, who I'd hoped would be able to put me in touch with some of their portfolio companies, all tried to convince me to come join them. And when I did apply to tech companies, they pushed me over to business operations, because that's what they thought was going to work for me. But I was determined to land a product role, which brings me to my first lesson. It only takes one yes. I reached out to a number of startups at that point, thinking that maybe I could find one and convince one to take a chance on me. At the top of my list was Uber, which was a company that had transformed my life as a consultant. I used to have to wake up 30 minutes, sometimes an hour early, just to play games with taxi operators to try and get a cab to pick me up and take me to SFO. Uber was magical. But when I finally got in touch with Uber, the recruiter told me that they had just hired a product manager the month before and they didn't need another one. But it wasn't a no. So I took that as a good sign, and instead decided to look through my network and see who I knew that could put me in touch with someone at Uber. I found a girl in my network who happened to be coworkers with the head of product at Uber at a previous company. Seemed perfect, except for the fact that I had met this girl in college, my freshman year, once, during sorority rush, for a sorority I didn't even join. But I didn't really let that hold me back, and I reached out to her anyway, and she couldn't have been nicer. She put me in touch with the head of product at Uber, and 3 days later, I had an offer in hand. Looking back, I realized it would have been so easy to give in to the pressure of what everyone was telling me, that I wasn't technical enough and that my consulting skill set was not applicable. But I ignored the dozens of no's in pursuit of that one yes, and because of that, I found a career that I absolutely love. So here I was in a job that I'd been pursuing for a while. It was my dream job. It had finally happened. But I realized really quickly after a couple days on the job that unlike college, getting in wasn't the hardest part. I actually had to figure out how to do a job that I knew nothing about. And in that first year, Uber was growing really, really fast. We went from being an expensive black car company to being everyone's private driver, launching UberX, Taxi, and expanding really, really fast. We were in 13 cities when I began and close to 100 by the end of the year. The company itself also was growing really, really fast. When I joined, we were 100 employees and 30 engineers, and by the end of the year, we were 500 employees and 150 engineers. Now, unfortunately, our product team didn't quite keep up with the pace of growth as our engineering team, which meant that all of the product managers were working on multiple high-priority projects at a time. I realized really quickly that my manager was only going to have so much time to coach me and mentor me. And so I learned how to become a product manager simply by asking a lot of questions and learning from my team. While it may sound like I figured out how to be a PM by myself, it's actually quite the opposite. Which brings me to my second lesson: learn from everyone around you. I remember earlier in my career, my eng manager sat down with me and said, why don't we sit down, you, me, the design lead, and just talk about our roles and our expectations of each other. It happened to be one of the most helpful conversations I had. It helped me understand what was expected of me and where I could lean on my other counterparts to fill in. And then when it actually came to doing my job, I figured out how to be a PM by observing everyone else around me. I looked at the product requirements docs that other people were looking at. I was known for snooping on Google Docs. And every week when we had weekly stand-ups, I would listen to what all the other PMs were working on. How were they moving their products forward? If they had run a really great brainstorm, I asked if I could attend their next one and observed what they were doing. People are super willing to help. You just have to ask. Even to this day, I find that the people that help make me better at my job aren't really the people that manage me or that I report to. It's actually the people all around me that help me get better at my job. So be curious, ask questions, ask for feedback, and listen to what other people have to say. You'll learn a ton. So during that first year, I spent a lot of time building foundational products that we needed in order to scale the business. The first project I worked on was building a dashboard so that all of our city teams every week didn't have to manually write their own queries to figure out how many trips they did. There would be a dashboard for that. We built help.uber.com. We didn't have a support website. And we built the engine that was going to translate all of the strings across all of our mobile apps and websites into 20+ languages. But at the end of 2013, our CEO sat us down and said that while these foundational products were great and necessary, he wanted us to start building products that would actually grow the business. And one of the areas he had identified was corporate transportation. There were hundreds of people, thousands of people taking rides every day that they were expensing to their company. How could we become employees' first choice in transportation? Or better yet, how could we make Uber part of companies' travel and expense policies? Until that point, all of our teams had also been organized by engineering function. So there was a web team, a couple web teams, mobile team, a back-end team. I was a web PM at the time, but for Uber for Business, our CEO wanted to try something a little bit different. He wanted to gather us in cross-functional teams, so we'd put mobile engineers, back-end, and front-end all working together. Sounded interesting. After the meeting, I went to my head of product and told her I wanted that job. It sounded pretty cool. And even though I was comfortable in my role on the web team, it sounded like a great opportunity to learn something about mobile, something I hadn't had any experience in before. Which brings me to my next lesson: raise your hand. Even though I was the most junior person on the team, my manager gave me a shot. I ended up learning a ton. I got to start with a completely blank page, talk to customers, understand their needs, and figure out what our strategy was going to be. In 2 months, our team built a beta product and onboarded our first Uber for Business customers. When I had asked for the position, I knew that there were other people at the company more qualified than I was, but I didn't let that hold me back. I mean, at that point, basically my only qualification for this role was the fact that I had expensed a ton of Ubers while I was a consultant. But it was because I raised my hand and asked that I got the opportunity. I didn't know it at the time, but my experience as the manager for Uber for Business gave me the skills and the confidence to ask for a bigger role in the next reorg, which is when I became the product manager for the Uber driver app. Especially in growing companies, reorgs are really, really common. Use those junctures to think about how you can learn more and seek out those opportunities. Don't let those doubts that you don't have the skills to do the job hold you back. The best way to learn something is to actually doing it. So over the years, the company continued to grow, but it still had the vibe of a small startup. And like many startups, Uber was a very, very social place. But having grown up and gone to college in the Bay Area, I had my own friends. And I, many times, would skip out on Uber social events to hang out with my friends. In many ways, I was very comfortable doing my own thing, even in terms of the way I dressed. I still remember my first day on the job. I showed up wearing what I thought I would normally wear to work at my consulting firm on a casual Friday, which was jeans, heels, a button-down shirt tucked in, a blazer, and pearls. Needless to say, I stuck out in a very, very casual startup environment. But even to this day, you can still see me around the office wearing button-down collared shirts and pearls because that's what makes me comfortable. You might think I'm crazy, but I don't like wearing hoodies. They're not comfortable to me. But at one point, I questioned whether I had made the right choices. And it was the senior leader's birthday. He'd invited a bunch of people from Uber to celebrate. It seemed like all the other rising PMs and superstar designers were invited. And a couple of peers of mine forwarded the email to me asking if I was planning to go. I didn't have an answer for them because I hadn't been invited. It made me wonder what I had done that got me not invited, or was there something I should have been doing? Had I not gone to enough social events? Was it because I was a woman? And the question that kind of irked me the most was this an indicator of where I stood in the company? A few days later, I was talking to my mentor, and I confessed my anxiety about not being invited. I had assumed he had been invited. This person was one of his peers, and he was an extremely well-liked person. But it turns out he hadn't been invited either, which was actually kind of confusing to me. It surprised me, and I asked him how he felt about it. He told me he and this other person worked together a ton, respected each other a lot, but they didn't have that much in common outside of work, and they weren't really friends. And he knew I wasn't really friends with this person either, and so he sort of looked at me and was like, why do you care? And I told him at that point it was because everyone else had been invited and all my peers were being invited, and I was worried that it was an indicator I was falling behind. I'll never forget what he told me. He told me, Maya, it doesn't matter. You don't need to be best friends with the people you work with in order to be successful. You don't need to fit in. Do good work and treat people with respect. That is what matters. And that's when I learned you don't have to fit in order to succeed. If I'm honest, his answer didn't really diminish my FOMO. I still was jealous that I didn't get invited. But having someone senior tell me that it was okay not to fit in and that the choices I had made to pursue my personal life made me feel more at ease. And then that winter, during performance review season, I was the only product manager of my peers to get promoted. Thanks. At this point, I started to take on more of a leadership role at the company. I started to manage people, my scope grew, I was starting to set the product direction for my area. Things were going great. I was growing personally, professionally. And then came 2017, and I don't think anything could have possibly prepared me for what last year was like. I still remember sitting in the airport in Mexico after a week-long vacation with my new fiance, and Susan Fowler's blog post came out. And I remember I cried the whole entire plane ride home. I was crushed to hear of the experiences that Susan Fowler had had. I was in shock. More than anything, I was confused because it wasn't the experience I had had at Uber. The Uber I had been a part of was one where someone took a chance on someone who had no prior product management experience, where people had supported me along the way and gave me opportunities to grow. So I decided to stay. I realized it was now my turn to pay it forward, which brings me to my final lesson, give back. The reason I stuck it out through 2017 was to be part of the change that was happening at the company, change that would enable other women to have the positive experiences that I had had. I wanted to make sure that women could feel comfortable and safe and were able to succeed at Uber. Uber had given me so much, and I wanted others to have that too. As a leader at the company, I had an opportunity and an obligation to give back and help others. I started to focus my attention on other people around me who I could help. I took on a dozen more mentors, and I started saying yes more often when people reached out, asking me for advice about how to navigate Uber or how to break into product management. And then there was just the small day-to-day things, becoming more conscientious of who was in the room, making sure that during meetings, it wasn't always the woman that was taking the notes, or that in the meeting, it wasn't just male voices dominating the conversation, that women's voices were also being heard. At some point, you too will achieve success in your careers. And when you do, don't forget about all of those people who helped you along the way, and figure out how you can give back. Take the time to help someone junior to you. Hire that woman with an unconventional background. Support other women when they feel alone in a room full of men. And when you have a chance, share what you've learned so that other people can benefit from your experiences. Thank you.